Subscribe to the channel and discover how this story changed everyone forever. The earth groaned under the weight of the afternoon. Deep cracks cut through the soil like open veins, silent witnesses to an endless thirst that had punished the backlands of Pernambuco for almost 2 years. Josue advanced along the familiar path, his steps marking the constant rhythm of one who knows every stone and thorn of the terrain. His leather hat protected his weathered face, eyes squinting against the relentless brightness that transformed everything into shades of ochre and grey. He was 53 years old, having lived with the same harshness of the Caatinga, each wrinkle on his face a story of resistance against droughts, famines, and losses. His dark skin and greying hair betrayed the time spent under the same merciless sky. He carried only a canteen of water, a pouch with flour and dried meat, and a knife at his waist, enough for his daily patrol of Colonel Jeremias's property. As the caretaker responsible for the farm's boundaries, he knew every corner of those lands which, although not his own, had held his footprints for more than 3 decades. That's when he noticed an unusual movement in the direction of the dried riverbed. He narrowed his eyes, his hand instinctively resting on the handle of his knife. In times of drought, it was common for desperate people to push into other people's properties. It wasn't out of malice that he turned them away. It was the order he'd received, the job that gave him sustenance and the roof of the mud house where he had lived alone since Marinalva. His wife had departed with the fever that took half the village 15 years ago. He approached cautiously, stepping where he knew twigs wouldn't betray his presence. The sound reached his ears first, a contained crying, as if the voice itself knew it shouldn't make itself noticed. Then a female voice, low, almost a whisper. "Calm down, my son, we'll find water, yes we will." What he saw as he rounded the dried bushes made his heart tighten. A young woman, no more than 30 years old, sitting in the dry riverbed, holding a child who couldn't be more than 5. Around them, 4 other children, all thin, their skin darkened by the sun and dust, digging the ground with pieces of branches and their bare hands, searching for moisture that had long gone. The woman raised her eyes when Josue's shadow projected over them. There was no fear in her gaze, only a deep exhaustion and a dignity that refused to bow completely. "Good morning, sir." Her voice was firm, despite being as dry as the earth. "We're just looking for water. We won't take long." The boy in her lap sobbed quietly, his cracked lips and feverish eyes. The others stopped what they were doing, watching the stranger with silent mistrust. Josue knew that look. It was the same one he saw in the mirror every morning. "There hasn't been water here for a long time," he responded, his voice softer than he intended. "The stream dried up at the beginning of the drought." "We've come." "From far away, sir. From Afogados. Our small farm didn't yield anything this year." "Nothing to eat, nothing to sell," the woman explained, adjusting her son in her lap. "They said there was still water here." Josue looked at each of the children. The oldest, a girl of perhaps 12, stared at him with a mixture of defiance and protection, as if she were ready to defend her younger siblings at any cost. The other 3, boys between 8 and 6 years old from what he could judge, seemed to have used their last energy to dig those useless holes. "What's your name?" he asked, removing the canteen from his shoulder. "Luzia. And this one is Severino," she responded, indicating the little one in her lap. "He's been sick since yesterday. The fever won't break." Josue extended the canteen without saying a word. Luzia hesitated for a moment, then accepted it, first bringing it to the lips of her youngest son. With care, she gave a few sips to each of the children, rationing every drop before finally allowing herself a small sip. She returned the canteen when a third of the water still remained. "Thank you, sir. May God repay you." "Josue," he replied, surprised by his own voice that seemed not to have been used for introductions in years. "My name is Josue." He removed what remained of his food for the day from his pouch. "It's not much." The same dignity he had seen before remained firm in Lucia's gaze. "We don't need charity, Mr. Josue. Just a place to rest until tomorrow, then we'll continue our journey." The lie was as clear as spring water. There was nowhere to go, no destination or real hope, only the continuous movement of those who flee from death without a certain direction. Against all the rules he had followed for decades, Josue made a decision that would change not only his fate, but that of the entire village of Bom Jesus do Riachao. "Come with me," he said, replacing his hat. "The village is an hour from here. There's an empty shack behind my house. It's not much, but it has a roof." The surprise on Lucia's face gave way to contained gratitude. Without asking questions, she began to gather her few belongings: a bundle of clothes, a small pot, an empty gourd. The oldest girl helped her siblings to stand up. Severino, too feverish to walk, was carried by Josue, who felt the abnormal heat of the small body against his chest. The path to the village had never seemed so long. With each step, Josue thought about what he would say to the colonel, to the neighbors, to Donna Clemencia, who, as a folk healer and midwife, was the most respected voice after the colonel himself. The village was dealing with its own problems, with the drought, rationing water from the only well that had not completely dried up. Bringing 5 new mouths to feed would not be viewed favorably, but there was something in that woman's gaze, in the silent dignity with which she divided the little among her children, that spoke directly to a part of Josue that he thought had died with Marinalva. Something he couldn't name, but recognized as essential. When they arrived at the first houses of the village, the sun was already beginning its descent on the horizon. The few people who were still on the street stopped to observe the unusual group. The solitary caretaker carrying an unknown child, followed by a woman and 4 other dusty children. The looks were not hostile, but carried the natural mistrust of those who live in times of scarcity. "Good afternoon, Mr. Josue." Donna Clemencia's voice cut through the silence as she approached, her small, energetic body moving with agility that defied her 70 years. Her dark, shrewd eyes quickly assessed the situation. "I see you've brought visitors." Josue felt the weight of the decision he had made, but there was no turning back. In the Caatinga, as in life, certain trails once traveled do not allow return. And as night approached, bringing its mantle of stars over the punished backlands, new seeds of change began to germinate in that seemingly sterile land, promising a harvest that no one could yet imagine. Donna Clemencia examined little Severino with gentle but experienced hands. The heat emanating from the fragile little body was concerning. "Fever of deprivation," she diagnosed, as she mixed dried herbs in a small wooden mortar worn from use. "His body is crying out for sustenance." The shack behind Josue's house was nothing more than a single room with a dirt floor, but for Lucia and her children, it represented an oasis after weeks of sleeping under the stars. The children were already asleep, exhausted, on improvised mats made with carnauba palm straw that Josue had obtained from a neighbor. Only Marina, the oldest, resisted sleep, attentive to every movement of the adults. "Will he be all right?" asked Lucia, her voice trembling for the first time since Josue had found her. Donna Clemencia smiled, revealing the absence of some teeth. "By the grace of God and these herbs, tomorrow he'll be running around. But he needs good food. All of you." "You do." She cast a meaningful look at Josue, who understood the silent message. The arrival of that family to the village would not be simple. "I'll speak with the colonel early tomorrow," he said, running his hand through his graying hair. "If he authorizes it, you can stay here until—" He didn't complete the sentence. Until when? Until the next rain? Until they found another place? Until the drought ended? All seemed like empty promises in the face of the relentless reality of the backlands. Donna Clemencia rose with a sigh, her knees cracking. "I'll leave this tea ready. Give it to him every hour. I'll return tomorrow with more medicine." As she left, she placed her hand on Josue's shoulder in a gesture that said more than words. The night was long for Josue. Lying in his hammock, he heard the soft noises from the neighboring shack, a whisper, a contained cough, the creaking of the door when Lucia went out to give medicine to her son. He thought about the conversation he would have with Colonel Jeremias. He wasn't a cruel man, but his authority in the village came precisely from his ability to make difficult decisions in times of scarcity. "Each new mouth is less water in the well," he used to say. The sun had barely risen when Josue headed to the big house of the farm. The colonel was already up, as always, supervising the work of the few employees he still kept. Upon seeing Josue, he frowned. "I heard you brought migrants to the village," he said straightforwardly, offering a weak coffee to the caretaker. "A mother with 5 children," confirmed Josue, accepting the coffee. "They were looking for water in the dry bed of Souls Creek. The youngest one has a fever." The colonel nodded, thoughtful. He had lived 60 years between droughts and rainy seasons, which had given him the wisdom to listen before speaking. "Mr. Josue, you know better than anyone how we are around here. The well is getting lower, the remaining cattle barely have anything to eat, and the government only sent half the aid they promised." "I know, Colonel. But I couldn't leave them there. The boy would have died by the end of the day." The silence that followed weighed like lead. Finally, the colonel sighed. "They can stay for a week. After that, they'll have to continue their journey like the others." The others were dozens of families who had passed through the village in recent months, receiving water and food for 1 or 2 more days of walking, always heading south, where they said the drought was less severe. None stayed more than 1 night. It was the unwritten rule of collective survival. Upon returning home, Josue found Lucia in the small yard, washing clothes with the water he had set aside for his own use during the week. The children were sitting in a circle, eating porridge that Donna Clemencia had probably brought. Even Severino seemed better, his eyes more lively, although he was still pale. "The colonel gave us a week," he announced, unable to look directly into Lucia's eyes. He saw her shoulders tense for an instant, but they soon returned to their usual erect posture. "It's more than I expected," she responded simply, wringing a small shirt with controlled force. "We are grateful for your kindness." During the days that followed, the family's presence was felt throughout the village. There was no one who didn't comment on Josue's migrants. Some, like Mr. Arimatea, the owner of the small store, complained openly. "There's already a lack of food for those from here. How are we going to feed 5 more? Others, like Tonho, the blacksmith, showed themselves to be more understanding. "People of the same blood as us. Today it's them. Tomorrow it could be any of us." Josue remained silent, but observed how Lucia, far from hiding or begging for favors, sought ways to be useful. She helped Donna Clemencia collect and dry medicinal herbs, offered to carry water from the well for older women, repaired clothes with such small and precise stitches that she soon had several orders. The children, initially shy, began to mix with the locals. Marina, the oldest, revealed herself to be skilled with straw crafts, creating small objects that the women of the village admired. The boys helped with small services, always polite and hard-working. Only Severino, still recovering, remained quiet, observing everything with large, attentive eyes. 5 days after their arrival, an incident changed many people's perception of the family. Mr. Arimatea's youngest daughter, Nina, just 3 years old, disappeared while playing near the house. The entire village mobilized to search for her. The search lasted agonizing hours, with the merciless sun making each minute an eternity for the desperate parents. It was Severino, the quiet boy, who finally found her. Without telling anyone, he had followed the smell of ripe jackfruit to a distant tree where the little girl was sleeping, hidden between protruding roots after collecting fallen fruit. When they returned to the village, Severino carrying the sleeping Nina in his fragile arms, something changed in Mr. Arimatea's gaze. Gratitude spoke louder than fear. On the morning of the 7th day, Josue went again to the colonel's house, his heart heavy. He found him on the porch, drinking coffee and observing the horizon where distant clouds, still timid, were beginning to form. "I came to talk about the family," he began, hat in his hands. The colonel raised his hand, interrupting him. "No need, Josue, I've already decided." The caretaker prepared to argue, surprising himself with his own willingness to confront his employer of decades, when the colonel continued. "I spoke with the priest yesterday. The church has a small room in the back that isn't being used. They can stay there until we find a better solution." The relief that Josue felt was so intense that he needed to lean on the porch column. "Thank you, Colonel." "Don't thank me yet," responded the older man, serious. "The well is dropping faster than we expected. If it doesn't rain in the next 15 days, all of us will have to think about leaving." 15 days, a deadline that now hung over the entire community like a sentence. Upon returning to the village, Josue observed how Lucia's children were already playing with the locals without distinction. He saw how the women included her in the conversation circle as they worked together. He realized that, in some mysterious way, that family that had arrived with nothing was already part of the fabric of the community. It was at that moment that he made a decision. Without saying a word to anyone, he gathered his tools and some provisions. There was an old story told by the elders about a spring on the slopes of Serra das Queimadas, a 3-day walk from there. Many considered it just a legend, but his grandfather, a man who knew every inch of that backland, had sworn it was real. The water flows under the heart-shaped rock, he used to say. Even in the worst drought, it never stops. Josue had never given much credit to that story. Now it was the only hope. If he found the spring, he could save not only Lucia's family, but the entire village. If he failed, he preferred not to think about that possibility as he prepared to leave at dawn, taking with him only the essentials and the determination of one who, for the first time in many years, had found a purpose greater than his own survival. Josue departed before the first rooster crow announced the morning. He left a simple note with Dona Clemencia, asking her to explain his absence to the colonel. "I went to look for water in Serra das Queimadas. If I don't return in 7 days, don't wait for me anymore." The healer read the message with a heavy heart, recognizing in those simple words the greatness of a gesture that could cost the old caretaker's life. She carefully folded the paper and kept it in the pocket of her worn dress. She would only tell the others when they asked about him. The news of Josue's departure spread through the village like wildfire. Opinions were divided between admiration and skepticism. "Foolish old man," grumbled Mr. Arimatea, although his eyes betrayed a glimmer of hope. "He'll die of thirst looking for water that doesn't exist." "If there's anyone who can find that spring, it's Josue," countered Tonho, the blacksmith. "He knows this backland like the back of his hand." Lucia remained silent, but her eyes constantly followed the direction of the distant mountain range, visible only as a bluish shadow on the horizon. At night, when she believed no one could see her, she knelt beside the mat where her children slept and prayed, her lips moving in silent prayers. Time passed with the cruel slowness characteristic of waiting. Each day without news of Josue was another day when the well level dropped a few centimeters. Rationing became more severe. Only 1 bucket per family, regardless of the number of people. Children received priority, then the elderly and sick. The animals that still resisted were taken to drink once every 2 days. On the 3rd day after Josue's departure, little Severino fell ill again. It was no longer the fever that consumed him, but a dry, persistent cough that seemed to tear his fragile chest. Dona Clemencia prepared syrups, said prayers, applied poultices. Nothing seemed to alleviate the child's suffering. "It's the dryness of the air," the old healer explained to Lucia, who watched over her son day and night. "His lungs are weak. He would need a more humid place." Lucia nodded, her eyes red from sleepless nights. "If Josue finds water—" She left the sentence unfinished, fearing that naming hope might frighten it away. On the morning of the 5th day, when the sun was still just a promise on the horizon, a group of 3 men arrived at the village. They were mounted on emaciated horses, their faces hardened by the sun and the difficult life. The leader, a tall man with a thick beard and penetrating gaze, introduced himself to the colonel as Captain Torquato, a representative of the state government. "We are taking a census of the villages affected by the drought," he explained, while accepting the water offered with hospitality. "We need to know how many people still resist, to organize the removal." The word removal fell like a stone in the stomach of those who heard it. Colonel Jeremias frowned. "What removal is this, Captain?" The man took a long sip before answering. "The government has decided that it is no longer viable to maintain aid to such isolated villages. You will be transferred to the refugee camp in Caruaru. There you will have guaranteed water and food." Transferred, refugees. Words that no one there had ever imagined hearing referring to themselves. The colonel, for the first time since the drought began, seemed truly shaken, And our lands? Our homes? The captain shrugged, a gesture that carried all the indifference of bureaucracy in the face of human suffering. They will stay here, obviously. If the drought passes, whoever wants can return. The government doesn't guarantee that you'll find everything as you left it, of course. How much time do we have? Asked the colonel, his voice firm despite the shock. 3 days. The convoy of trucks will come on Sunday at noon. Each family can take only the essentials. Animals will have to stay. The news spread quickly, plunging the village into a mix of despair and resignation. Some, like Mr. Arimatea, immediately began to separate belongings and dismantle what they could of their houses. Others, like Tonho the blacksmith, refused to believe that they would have to abandon the place where they were born and raised. "I'd rather die here than become a refugee," he declared, hammering the iron with redoubled force as if he could forge a solution on his anvil. Donna Clemencia, more pragmatic, gathered the women to organize the departure. "We need to ensure that everyone has water and food for the journey. The weakest will need special care." That night, gathered around a small fire to save firewood, the residents shared memories of the village, like someone saying goodbye to a loved one. Stories of generous rainy seasons, San Juan festivals, weddings, births, and even previous droughts they had overcome together. "My father used to say that this land has the stubbornness of the Mandakaru cactus," remembered Donna Clemencia. "Even when it seems dead, it holds life within itself." Lucia listened in silence, Severino asleep in her lap, his breathing still difficult. Marina, sitting beside her, let silent tears roll down her young face. They had found shelter there, brief but true, and now they would have to leave again to a fate as uncertain as the previous one. In the midst of the conversation, one of Lucia's boys, little Tio, 8 years old, who had been playing with other children a bit away from the group, came running, his eyes wide with excitement. "Mother! Mother! There's a man coming. I think it's Mr. Josue." Everyone jumped, up, running to the entrance of the village. In the twilight of the night, a staggering figure was slowly approaching. As he got closer, they could recognize Josue, but so transformed that for a moment they hesitated. He was covered in dust, unshaven, his clothes torn. He visibly limped from his left leg, leaning on an improvised staff. But what impressed most was his gaze, bright, alive, with an intensity that no one had ever seen before. "I found it," were his first words, his voice hoarse from exhaustion and thirst. "The spring exists, clean, fresh water that never dries." A murmur of astonishment ran through the group. The colonel stepped forward, holding Josue by the shoulders. "Are you sure, man? Isn't it a delirium of thirst?" Josue smiled, a smile so rare on his austere face that it seemed to transform him into another person. "I'm sure. I drank from it. I filled this to prove it." With trembling hands, he removed a sealed gourd from his pouch. He removed the cap, and first extended it to the colonel, who hesitated for a moment before taking a small sip. His eyes widened. "It's true, it's spring water." The gourd passed from hand to hand, each one drinking only a symbolic sip so that everyone could taste. When it reached Lucia, she first offered it to Severino, who drank eagerly, his eyes closed in delight. Only then did she allow herself a small sip, letting the water refresh her parched throat. "How did you find it?" someone asked. Josue leapt, himself full-seated on a log, exhausted. "I followed the marks that my grandfather taught me. The heart-shaped rock is there, as he said. The water springs from under it, forms a small pond, and then disappears into the earth again. But it's constant. It never stops." Hope, timid at first, began to grow among those present. The colonel, however, remained cautious. "Even if it exists, Josue, it's 3 days from here. How will we bring enough water for everyone?" "We don't need to bring the water," responded Josue, with a surprising conviction in someone so traditionally reserved. "We can take the village to it." The silence that followed was broken by Captain Torquato, who had watched everything with evident skepticism. "This is madness. The government has determined that you will be removed to Karuaru. There you will have all necessary assistance." Josue. faced the man with a firmness that made the other instinctively retreat. "With all due respect, Captain, we are the people of Bom Jesus do Riachao. Our life is in this land. If there is water 3 days from here, that's where we'll go." The Colonel scratched his chin, thoughtful. "Serra das Queimadas is within Major Clementino's lands. He would never allow us to establish ourselves there." "The Major died last year," informed Tonho, the blacksmith. "The farm has been abandoned since then. The heirs are from the capital and have never appeared around here." A spark of possibility began to grow among them. Captain Torquato, realizing that he was losing control of the situation, tried a last card. "You can't simply decide to move an entire village. There are procedures, authorizations." Donna Clemencia stepped forward, her eyes shining with the wisdom of her many years. "Captain, with all due respect, you came here to take us away because the government thinks we are condemned without water. Now we've discovered that we have water. What does the government prefer? That we be refugees depending on aid in Caruaru, or that we be a self-sufficient village on abandoned lands of the Serra?" The argument was irrefutable in its simple logic. The captain hesitated, clearly disarmed by the collective determination that was beginning to form. The colonel, assuming again his leadership role, clapped his hands to get attention. "Let's take a vote. Who wants to try life in Serra das Queimadas, near the spring that Josue found?" Hands began to rise, hesitant at first, then with more confidence. Lucia was one of the first, her thin arm extended upward like a flag of hope. Soon almost everyone had their hands raised. Only Mr. Arimatea and 2 other families remained reluctant. "I prefer the certainty of Caruaru to the promise of a spring that might dry up tomorrow," explained the shopkeeper. No one criticized him. In times of drought, each follows the path they believe will lead to survival. The decision was made. At dawn, they would begin preparations for the journey to Serra das Queimadas. 3 days of walking with children, elderly, and the little they could carry. It would be difficult, perhaps impossible for some. But for the first time in many months, there was a gleam in people's eyes that not even the dust of the backlands could hide. The gleam of hope reborn, as precious as the water itself they sought. Dawn had not yet given way today when the village was already buzzing with activity. Carts were loaded with essentials, seeds saved for the next planting, tools, pots, clothes, medicines prepared by Donna Clemencia. The few remaining animals, some goats, chickens, and 2 resistant donkeys, would be taken as well. Everything else would be left behind. Houses built by generations, furniture carved with care, stories engraved on the mud walls and wooden doorposts. Josue, despite the exhaustion from his previous journey, refused to rest. With his injured leg bandaged by Donna Clemencia, he moved between groups, guiding, organizing, planning the safest route. It was decided they would leave at dusk, when the heat was less merciless, traveling mainly during the night and early morning hours. 3 days was the normal walking time to the Serra, but with children and elderly they calculated at least 4. Water would be the most precious resource during the journey. What remained in the well was distributed equitably, prioritizing the most vulnerable. Each adult would carry their own quota and that of a child or elderly person. There would be no margin for waste. Captain Torquato and his men observed the preparations with growing concern. Finally, he approached Colonel Jeremias. "This is madness, Colonel. You're leading these people to almost certain death. If you come with us to Caruaru, you'll at least have the guarantee of survival." The colonel, busy adjusting the load of one of the carts, raised his eyes to the official. "Captain, I've lived through 3 major droughts before this one. I've seen people leave for refugee camps and never return. I've seen entire families lose not only their land, but their dignity." He paused, adjusting his leather hat. "I prefer to risk dying as a free man, trying to find my own way, than to live as a beggar dependent on government handouts." The captain opened his mouth to retort, but something in the old farmer's gaze stopped him. It was the same look he had seen in Josue and Donna Clemencia, even in the children, a determination born not of stubbornness, but of a deep understanding of what it meant to belong to that land. With a resigned sigh, he extended his hand. May God accompany you. Then, I will report that the village refused the official removal. He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, If you really find that spring and establish a new village, send news. The government will need to know where to register. It was almost an official recognition of the decision made, and everyone present understood the significance of that small gesture. At dusk, when the first stars began to dot the sky, the caravan set out. In front, Josue, leaning on his staff, indicated the way. Right behind, Colonel Jeremias and Tonho the blacksmith led the main group. In the rear, Donna Clemencia, with her herbs and knowledge, ready to attend to any emergency. Lucia walked in, the middle of the procession, Severino in her arms, her other children around her. Marina, the oldest, carried a bundle almost her size, refusing help with the same dignity she had inherited from her mother. Little Tiao led a thin goat, talking to the animal as if it were an old friend. The twins, Dito and Zezinho, 6 years old, took turns carrying the cage with 2 speckled hens, a treasure that the family had brought from Afogados. The walk was slow, each step measured to preserve energy. They avoided talking beyond what was necessary, saving even their breath. The path, initially flat, gradually began to rise as they approached the first undulations that announced Serra das Queimadas. At dawn on the second day, they made a longer pause to rest during the hottest hours. They set up improvised shades, with sheets stretched between branches of skinny trees. It was during this rest that Severino had another coughing fit, stronger than the previous ones. His small body arched with the effort to seek air, his face red, his eyes wide in silent panic. Donna Clemencia ran to help, quickly preparing an herb infusion that she brought to the boy's lips. It's the dust, she diagnosed, worried. His lungs can't take it. Lucia held her son, her eyes reflecting a fear that her voice refused to express. How long until we reach the spring? Josue, who had approached upon noticing the commotion, frowned. At least 2 more days at the pace we're going. He exchanged a significant look with Donna Clemencia, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Both knew the boy might not resist that long. We need 2 strong men to go ahead, declared the healer, rising with decision. Take the boy and his mother. They can get there in a day and a half if they go quickly. Immediately, Tonho the blacksmith stepped forward. I'll go. Josue nodded. And I'll show the way. Lucia began to protest, looking at her other children. I can't leave them. Marina stepped forward, her eyes showing a maturity far beyond her 12 years. I'll take care of them, Mother. You need to go with Severino. Donna Clemencia placed her hand on the girl's shoulder. Don't worry, they'll stay with me. I'll care for them as if they were my own. There was no time for long goodbyes. With few provisions and 2 gourds of water, the small group departed quickly. Josue, despite his injured leg, maintained a steady pace, using his staff to propel himself up the steeper slopes. Tonho carried Severino, wrapped in a sheet to protect him from the dust. Lucia followed right behind, carrying only a small bundle with medicines and a little food. As they climbed, the vegetation began to subtly change. The sparse, thorny caatinga gave way to greener bushes, signs that humidity increased as they gained altitude. By dusk they stopped briefly to rest. Severino slept a restless sleep, his breathing still difficult, but less desperate than before. While they ate a little flour with rapadura sugar, Lucia finally asked the question she had kept all day. Why are you doing this, Mr. Josue? Risking your life for us, whom you didn't even know until a few days ago. Josue chewed slowly, his eyes fixed on the first stars that appeared. When he finally responded, his voice had a rare softness. When Marinalva, my wife, fell ill with the fever, I thought the world had ended. She was everything I had. After she departed, I closed myself off. I lived just to live without really feeling anything. He paused, taking a small sip of water. When I saw you dividing the little water I gave among your children, ensuring that all had the same, something inside me woke up. I remembered that there is more to life than just surviving. Lucia nodded, understanding perfectly what he meant to say. Every day I think about giving up, she confessed, in a low voice so as not to wake Severino. When their father didn't return from his last work trip, when we had to leave our little house in Afogados, when we went hungry on the road. But then I look at them and remember that I can't stop. They need me. Tonho, who listened in silence, added with his deep voice, "That's what the drought does. It either kills us or it teaches us that alone we are nothing." They resumed the walk before dawn, taking advantage of the relative coolness of early morning. As they climbed, the path became steeper and rockier. Josue frequently needed to stop to catch his breath, his injured leg protesting with each step. Even so, he refused to slow the pace. Around noon, when the sun punished mercilessly, Josue stopped abruptly, raising his hand. "We're close. The heart-shaped rock should be just after that curve." Renewed by hope, they quickened their pace, as much as their strength allowed. As they rounded the large rock formation, they finally saw it. A huge rock, sculpted by time, and the elements into the unmistakable shape of an imperfect but recognizable heart. And beneath it, the miracle. Clear water continuously flowing, forming a small pond before disappearing among the rocks below. The vision was so unexpected, so absolutely magical in that scenario of drought, that for a moment, none of the three could move. It was Severino who broke the enchantment. As if he sensed the proximity of water, the boy woke up, stirring in Tonho's arms. "Water," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I see water, Mother." Lucia was the first to run, kneeling at the edge of the small pond. She touched the water with trembling hands, as if fearing it was a mirage that would dissolve upon contact. When she confirmed its solidity, its freshness, she raised her eyes to the sky in silent gratitude, before turning to Tonho. "Bring him." With infinite care, she sat at the water's edge with Severino in her lap. She wet her fingers and moistened her son's dry lips, then his hot forehead, his cheeks. The boy sighed with relief at each refreshing touch. Gradually, she allowed him to drink small sips. Josue and Tonho watched, both with a lump in their throats, at that scene of love so simple and so profound. That night, they slept under the brightest stars that any of them remembered having seen. The cooler air of the mountain, combined with the proximity of water, created a surprisingly pleasant microclimate. Severino, already breathing more easily, slept peacefully beside his mother. Josue, sitting a little apart, watched the moon illuminate the rippling surface of the small pond. Tonho approached, offering a piece of rapadura sugar. "Thinking about the rest of the people?" "Yes," replied Josue. "They must be reaching the foot of the mountain now. Tomorrow they begin the most difficult climb." "I'll go down to meet them." "Fair dawn," decided Tonho. "I can help with the children and the elderly." Josue nodded, grateful. "I'll stay here with Lucia and the boy. We can start preparing a better camp for when everyone arrives." When the rest of the caravan finally reached the spring, 2 days later, they found a surprising transformation. Josue and Lucia, with the help of Severino, who was already recovered, had created a simple system to channel part of the water, built temporary shelters with branches and foliage, and even delimited a small area for the animals. The arrival was marked by tears of joy and exhaustion. The children ran to the water, incredulous at so much abundance after so long a scarcity. The adults knelt, touching the water with almost religious reverence. Donna Clemencia, upon reuniting with Lucia and noting Severino's visible improvement, couldn't hold back her tears. "It's a miracle," she declared, hugging the boy, who smiled shyly. "No," corrected Lucia. "It was Mr. Josue's courage, Tonho's strength, your wisdom. It was all of us, deciding not to give up." In the days that followed, the camp gradually transformed into something more permanent. Tonho the blacksmith, using skills passed down through generations, built an improvised forge. Colonel Jeremias organized groups to explore the area, identifying the best places for future plantings. Donna Clemencia discovered medicinal herbs that didn't grow in the lower lands, expanding her healing arsenal. But it was an accidental discovery by Marina, Lucia's oldest daughter, that definitively sealed the group's fate. Exploring the nearby slopes with other children, she found vestiges of an ancient occupation, Stone foundations, rusted tools, signs that long ago other people had recognized the value of that place. "We're returning home," said Donna Clemencia, when they saw the findings, not discovering a new place. A month after arrival, when there were already simple but solid huts, when the first seeds were already germinating in the fertile soil around the spring, when the animals were recovering their strength with more abundant food, an unexpected visit arrived. Captain Torquato, accompanied by 2 men and guided by a local resident who knew the way, appeared in the new village. He brought official documents, maps, and an expression of genuine surprise at seeing what they had built in such a short time. "I came to officially register the new location of Bom Jesus do Riachão," he announced, after recovering from the initial shock. "The government recognizes the right of occupation of these lands, considered abandoned after the death without heirs of Major Clementino. It was the legitimization they needed, the guarantee that they would not be displaced again." The news was celebrated with a modest but significant feast. For the first time, they were not just surviving, they were thriving. As he watched the children playing around the small pond, now carefully fenced and protected, Josue felt a presence beside him. It was Lucia, carrying a gourd with fresh water. "For the man who saved not only my children but an entire community," she said, offering him the drink with a smile that illuminated her dark eyes. Josue accepted the gourd, his fingers lightly brushing against hers. "I wasn't the one who saved anyone. It was you who taught us the true meaning of strength." As he drank the water, which had never seemed so sweet to him, Josue realized that the story of that spring, that migration, that rebirth, would be told for generations, not as a tale of charity or individual heroism, but as a reminder that the true strength of a people is measured by their ability to share, to begin again, to recognize in a stranger not a threat, but a possibility. The seeds planted in those first difficult days would grow for decades, not only in the fertile soil around the spring, but in the hearts of those who learned that, even in the most arid times, solidarity is the most precious water. Once again, the family that had once pulled roots from dry earth to survive was now planting hope in fertile soil, creating deep roots that not even the most severe drought could pull. Pastai, you have just followed a journey of overcoming and unity in the Brazilian backlands. If this story touched your heart, don't keep this emotion just for yourself. Share your impressions in the comments, leave your like, and subscribe to receive more narratives that celebrate the strength of the Brazilian people and their deepest values. Each story is a seed that, like the spring,